I cannot believe that we're already in the back half of 2024.
Are you kidding me?
But here we are. Before you know it, the calendar will be turning again, and that means we are already getting ready for 2025 conferences, and one that I'm personally very excited to attend again is the Insights EDU conference. If you care at all about growing enrollment and building a student-centered higher ed experience, you really should be at this conference. Registration is now open, so secure your spot while early bird pricing is still available. Visit insightsedu.com for more information and to register. That's visit insightsedu.com for more information and to register.
Hey everybody, this is Elvin Freitas, co-founder of the EdUp Experience, and today we are extremely excited to announce our paid subscription service. By subscribing today, you will get exclusive early access to ad-free episodes, extended episodes, bonus episodes, original content. That's right, original content and invites to special events, all while helping to sustain EdUp. To become a subscriber, go to edupexperience.com. That's EDUP experience.com and subscribe to our free email newsletter to learn how you can get access. Again, go to edupexperience.com. That's EDUP experience.com.
Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to ed up on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. This is Dr. Joe Salustio back with you on another episode. And I got to tell you, I'm excited. My guest co-host, I've been trying to get her on here to guest co-host with me for a while. She's elusive. She is elusive. But we interviewed her a long time ago now, it seems like. And she was one of the presidents that we profiled in our book, Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, that included the first 125 presidents that we interviewed. In fact, I got to believe that this guest was episode 100 is standing out to me.
I think so. Yeah.
Do you think so? Like, because I remember keeping it 100 was like the name of the episode.
Keeping it, yeah, that's right. Yep.
And so that was probably 2020.
2020. Yeah, it was
early 2021.
Pandemic.
Yeah, let's get her in. Ladies and gentlemen, she's Dr. Daria Willis. She's the president of Howard Community College. Daria, welcome back to an EdUp microphone after so long.
I know. Thanks for having me. And I'm so glad to be here and have made it finally after 2020. So that's 4 years. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it might have been 2021. So it's been probably 3 years.
Yeah.
Which is pretty hard to believe. So I have to go back and see what number president you were. You were definitely in the first 125. But so yeah, episode 100 though. Or either you were episode 100 or the 100th president. I can't remember. But you know what? I'm glad to have you back. And first of all, how are you and how are things going at Howard Community College?
I am well. We are moving and grooving. This is going to be an exciting fall semester. So it's just great to see you again, Joe, and to be able to profile such a wonderful person that you're going to introduce next. It's just an exciting time to be in higher ed.
And I want to just tell a quick story to the listeners, because I've interviewed so many people and they've kind of seen me but don't know me that well. And so I saw you, Daria, at a conference. I can't remember what. And you were eating breakfast in the Marriott Lounge. And I just stroll over at like 7 in the morning, 6:45. I'm like, hey, Daria, what's going on? And you're
I remember
about to
that.
stick a piece of fruit in your mouth and you're like, hello, can I help you? And it was like...
I remember that. We were in Philly. Yeah, it was the Middle States Conference. And I was like, and you were like, hey, can we get a picture? And I said, hold on. I don't have, all of this isn't together yet. I'm not ready for the world. So we'll get
You're
that
like, who are you again? No, you didn't say that. But it was funny. And I never apologized for that. I was like, I should have let her finish her fruit before I ran over to
Oh, no, it's all good. It is fun.
Anyway, we'll be back at the Middle States Conference. I hope you will be too.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be there, have our whole podcast set up, but we'll talk about that at another time. Let's bring in our guest right now to talk about what's going on in workforce skills, the whole bit that we care so much about here on the podcast. He's Eddie Lin. He's co-founder of NexusEdge Education. Eddie, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you. We always like to level set with our audience, Eddie. Tell us all about NexusEdge Education. Who do you serve? How do you serve them?
Yeah, we actually serve mostly community college students, actually. So what we do is we partner with a lot of different companies, including Google, Apple, Citi, Snapchat, Shopify. We integrate their training into learning management systems so that community college faculty can integrate those materials within their classrooms. And this does a lot of things that's big in today's days of skills-based hiring and training is it aligns classroom instruction with what employers want in the workforce for the rapidly changing skill set. I think we see happens more and more these days. And it makes teachers' lives a lot easier because I used to teach at 2 community colleges in California. Creating curriculum is not simple. So I think appreciate your instructors more than ever. Students, they get credentials as they complete these exams throughout their course. And finally, those credentials also provide opportunities to interview with those companies or other companies. So I guess to really summarize in a sentence, we integrate employer materials into classroom instruction. Students that take those exams in class get digital credentials, and those credentials can give them interviews at the end. So really try to provide them the full life cycle of learning the skills they need to know and scaling the relationships they need to really prove that they have the skill sets to get those jobs. And that is the problem that we've been solving.
Amazing.
Derry, I didn't have the sound effects when I interviewed you.
You did, so this is a totally new experience for me.
You'll get it now.
It's awesome.
Eddie, the baseline assumption is that faculty in community colleges want to embed these certifications into their curriculum. Is that so that's a baseline assumption. Is it that easy? Is there barriers to that? Because typically we know there's a lot of red tape.
Oh, there's endless barriers to that. I think from a product perspective as a founder, the best way to learn how to do this, because it is this is not a simple thing, is to become a faculty and to understand, are you really solving their problem? Is this something that they even want to do? Because one of the critical assumptions of this as a distribution mechanism is that faculty will actually want to do this. And they do, you just have to find a way to, I think a lot of times when people build products, large companies, small companies do this, they try to have faculty conform to what they've done as a product, when it should be the total opposite. So, when I was teaching, there was a couple things that I noticed myself on make sure to solve faculty problems to ensure optimize for adoption, essentially. And one of the big things was that how am I supposed to know what industry is looking for? But at the same time, I'm very busy because faculty, there's a lot that we have to do. There's a lot of constraints. And so making it easy to do is number one. Is you can't ask me to create an account on another system. You can't have students create an account on another system. You can't ask me to go dig through a library stuff, cut and paste into my Canvas shell and do all this stuff. Sorry. And another thing is, you can't ask me to write a whole bunch of quizzes to assess people on the curriculum that you wrote. So these are all the requirements. And within one click, I have to be able to import something that I feel comfortable with as an instructor. I can still edit it to make sure it's my course. There is a corresponding exam within it that assesses my students fairly, and that all of this can be done within just a couple clicks. Those are my requirements as an instructor. And you, as a product person, you talk to your colleagues at your college and ask, okay, well, the other faculty around me, is this important to them too? Will these requirements, if we meet these requirements, is this something they will use? And as long as you design your product and your distribution along that for faculty, then you're going to gain the type of adoption we haven't really seen in 20 years of EdTech.
I still think there's a lot there. And Derry, you know more than I do about maybe the complication. I don't want to say complications, but I would say the necessity of skill embeddedness in curriculum, the necessity of the workforce helping to dictate what that curriculum looks like, and perhaps the barriers around what it takes to get there. I think we sometimes make things sound easy. Maybe they are that easy, but I think there's always structural components to consider. Isn't that right?
Yeah, there are definitely structural components to consider. But as you were talking, Eddie, one of the things that I was thinking about is what is it when you think of vendors and products and software? I think one of the things that has been really interesting in higher ed, maybe over the last 5 years, is that there's been an onslaught of all of these people who say that they can do these things and make these changes. And I think that your product is really cool and what you're talking about. But my question is, What sets yours apart? What makes it different? Like, what's your why? Why did you get into this? Because a lot of times we get folks, and I can tell you, my inbox is usually filled with vendors saying, buy my product. And
Tell
they
them
come
like
all
it
the way
is.
to the president. I'm like, I'm the last person you need to talk to about this, because if I present it, the whole campus is going to say no. But I always, when I interact with vendors, especially from a leadership standpoint and people who are giving us a product that's supposed to help us, I kind of want to know, why did you do it? Why did you get into this in the first place? What did you see was that problem? And how will that impact the student population as a whole across the country? And some of the things that we're trying to answer as a nation is about how to get our people back to work.
Yeah, great question. About 8 years ago, so most of my career history has actually been very corporate, interestingly enough. So 8 years ago, the California community college system asked me to teach. And I said, are you sure? Like, I've never taught anything before. Does this require a degree, a credential? They're like, no, you're good. Don't worry about it. I was like, okay. And then so I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, is there a book? Like, what do we do? There's so many things you take for granted. So I was just kind of trying to figure out what to do. And I think throughout later in the semester, I was like, wait a second. My kids, my students could have been my colleagues at Goldman Sachs. I know this with great conviction, but I'm pretty sure no one believes me. So how do we do that? And that's kind of the first moment where I was like, all right, well, that's one of the things that, it's not fair that there's certain people who get recruited for this and not recruited for that, but they all have the same ability. That's not right. So how do we fix that? And you look at a greater picture. You look at what's going on today in society, and like a lot of what's going on, I think a lot of what you see that's going on in the world right now, a lot of it stems from economic inequality. So if we fix economic inequality, a lot of other things I think will be fixed as well. And I think that stems from education. So increasing the opportunity within education, how fair it is for people to get recruited, that is number one. So that's the why we did what we did. Is I saw my own students, could have been my coworkers, but have been pretty much ignored across the board. For anywhere else I've worked. So it became a question about how do we create a mechanism to change that? I can go into the other details, but that is the original why.
And I think that's awesome, because it's a lot of times we forget that. And I've been trying to challenge folks to think about the greater societal issue. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? So it's really cool. And then how you are able to integrate the certifications into the curriculum to make it easier, I guess, for students and professors to not only learn from each other, but to go out and get a family wage earning career. I just think that's a truly special point that you're bringing up here.
Thanks. I did. You brought up something I really wanted to address too, especially with so many EdTech founders hitting you up. I think something that people overlook when building stuff is the faculty and how important they are to this process. I think people are they don't realize how critical it is, not just from an education standpoint directly, but if you don't have the buy-in of the faculty, you're not going to be able to get distribution at scale. So I see so many products, I'm like, does anyone just forget the faculty as a key stakeholder in this process? Anyway, I just want to mention that too, because I felt too often that is one group of stakeholders that gets overlooked in the tech process. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just wanted to draw some attention to that as well.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if the word's overlooked, but certainly not included in what the impact of a technology change might be, right? So whenever we're having a technology change on campus, we look at how is this going to affect users, and typically we think about our users as staff first, yeah. But faculty touch so much. They touch the grades. I mean, you think about grades. There's just nothing we can do without grades. I mean, whether you love grading the A, B's, and C's, or you don't love grading, the fact of the matter is we have grades to assess a progress, and faculty are inputting these grades, or at least providing the grades for input if you don't have the right technology. So there is buy-in that has to happen across campus whenever you create change. Now, on the other side of the coin, it is hard to create change in higher education because maybe not hard isn't the word. It's an evolving. We have to change in higher ed. We know we have to, and we have to change because the workforce and because the student are kind of sandwiching us, saying you have to change. Right? Student is demanding more. Employers are saying we need students to have X, Y, and Z. So how do we connect those dots in higher education with a current infrastructure in many institutions that was built 200 years ago? And, a student experiences this policy or this education at 18 years old and everything works beautifully. And then you take a 33 or 35-year-old commuter student with 2 kids and none of the policies work. Mm-hmm. How do you get institutions who might be stuck to think differently about technology and skills?
Yeah, so I think the most important disconnect I saw this process is, it goes back to faculty, is that how are we going to get someone who's been teaching for 20 years to learn the latest and greatest in AI? It's not fair to ask a faculty to say, hey, I'm going to take this huge class over a 2-year period, learn as much as I can about it, write a whole bunch of curriculum about it, and then teach that to my students. That takes too long, isn't practical, it's asking too much in instructors, and we had too many constraints to be able to do that kind of stuff. We have a lot of other responsibilities. Most community college faculty, at least in California, about 90% are adjuncts, right? So that means we have other stuff too. So that process of train the trainer inherently doesn't really work. And a lot of people do try that. So instead, we had to come up with a scalable mechanism to be able to get employer materials to that students. And that's the mechanism that we focused on. So all starts with the learning management system for us and says, how do we make these materials come direct, pre-formatted for that faculty? So we don't have to go learn how to do stuff just to teach stuff. That it's there, it's easily accessible. We can learn as faculty ourselves to learn like the materials ourselves, and also easily put it within the constructs of a class in a learning management system where we don't have to spend all this time to put it together ourselves. And I think that has become the key disconnect is, people have done a lot of different things, but until you get that employer buy-in and like the seamless bridge to be able to put that in the classroom, everything else, no matter what you do, I just can't see it working. So that's what we've seen from the experimentation that we've done. And that's kind of why I found that faculty piece so critical to everything.
Do you have any, it's interesting, and Joe, you brought up a good point about just kind of how ancient some of our processes are and policies. But I'm also very curious because I'm hearing a lot of institutions are dealing with ancient systems. Our systems were built in the 70s, and now we're in 2024, and it's like what was it? What were you on the iPhone 15? By the time you buy the iPhone 15, you're already late because it's not with another one. But now we're some of our institutions are stuck on like the first 2 or 3 iPhones, and we haven't even gotten to the 15. So then when we bring in folks like you to come and do this great work, like, do you also see that there's a barrier with the systems and trying to help institutions modernize, if you will? Because yes, you need the faculty. Yes, you need the staff. You've got to have the buy-in. But if you don't have the tech systems that are capable of managing such a fabulous modernized product, how are you able to implement it?
What's really interesting is I actually think the disconnects in the processes aren't actually related to technology because it hasn't changed that much. If you look at one of the critical points, I think, of technology infrastructure within community colleges, which is the space that we're in, is, most schools, it's going to be learning management systems is all touch points of all the students, and student information systems. So I like to learn, let's go down to learning management systems because that's the thing that touches literally every student. Because if you're not in the learning management system, you literally have failed school. So let's go with the LMS, and those haven't changed that much. And how much more do they really need to change, right? So sure, there's improvements here and there too, but at the end of the day, if you look at the last maybe 10-ish years, the LMS hasn't changed dramatically to a point where it's going to cause systemic failures within the education system. So I think it's actually more, as weird as it may be, especially from a tech person, I actually think it's more of a process thing that needs to be fixed, not the actual tech. As weird as that may sound, but that's just kind of how I felt about it, because the learning management system, I think, is in a place that it can facilitate all this. It's you just don't need anything more high tech really to do it. It's just changing the processes around it. That's how I feel about it. I know that sounds a little odd, but
no, it's not. It's interesting. Interesting viewpoint. I'll go back and tell all my president friends. So he said, "Don't worry about it because as long as your LMS is working, we're good."
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of people happy to hear that. The other part of that, though, is, and to your point, Daria, modernization, I believe, is key for institutions in terms of technology. But an LMS, what institutions need to do with their LMS is configure it for different types of delivery. right? Standard term credit, competency-based credit, direct assessment versus, so there's different ways of awarding credit. And so if you're building in credentials, you've got to have the right configurations to ensure, like if you're doing anything competency-based, you have to be able to say this course from Google is equal to this number of credits. And that comes with a different configuration. So the LMS has to have enough, I don't know the right word. It's got to be enough of a sponge to flex itself.
I did want to jump in on this because I think that is a very interesting point, is that there is, for us, the key to what we're doing is actually I would say the revolutionary part of what we're doing is the actual app itself, right? So but the standards for apps, it's been relatively the same, LTI 1.3 for many years, and it's not like that different from 1.1, 1.2. It's like saying what's made the iPhone so different, that's changed the world, is the apps that have been around it. So you see like Uber, it changes the way that we do all kinds of things. And look at all the other apps that have changed the world. It's not the phone itself. The phone itself, the iPhone 15, it's not that different than the 12 or the 11, although they are different. The phone itself hasn't changed, but look at the differences in the apps that have changed between the 11 and the 15. That's what's been really life-changing. So for me, I see the LMS more as the phone, and then the apps around it need to adapt to changing that world. And then I think the apps can be changed in a much cleaner way than necessarily having to completely reconfigure something. To me, it's more about, found the greatest challenge is more about the art of putting together content in a way that satisfies both employers and faculty, not necessarily the challenges that we did as a software company, put together the app. Although that is a challenge, I think it's actually harder to do the other way. It's just, I don't know. It's just, it's harder to, I think it was less obvious. How about that? When we're putting to the process, when we're putting the app together, we didn't realize that would actually be the most challenging part of everything.
Yeah, and I think the question falls now to what version of the iPhone Dr. Willis actually has. We're gonna poll the audience. We don't know, it could be a 15, a 14, or a 2.
It's fuzzy math.
But look, I think the premise of this episode is how students can understand the skills that they get.
Yeah.
Right? How do I communicate to an employer that I have a competency in X or a certificate in Y or a skill in this? And what if I, in a community college, and you know this, Dr. Willis, more than anybody, I'm an in and out student perhaps, and I do a semester or two, and if I go out and I don't have anything that I can properly communicate to an employer if I need to get a job, I just have credit.
Yep.
And what does that credit mean? How do I quantify it? How do I explain it? But if I have this certificate from this embedded employer, not to plug anybody in particular, but Google, it's a big brand, a Google certificate, I can communicate that as a part of the credit that I accrued. Isn't that the difference maker here, Eddie? Calling all higher ed marketing and enrollment management professionals. Hear. The Insights EDU conference is back. This is your chance to level up your marketing and enrollment management strategies, and the EdUp Experience podcast will be there once again. Join us at the Ritz-Carlton, New Orleans, February 12th through 14th for an unforgettable conference. Registration is now open with early bird pricing.
Outstanding.
Hey everybody, this is Elvin Freitas, co-founder of the EdUp Experience. Are you enjoying the conversation so far? Good, I hope so. Did you know that you can actually hear this conversation early before anybody else and ad free, so you don't have to hear my voice during these ads? And did you also know that you could get extended episodes, bonus episodes, original content? That's right, original content and invites to special events, all while helping to sustain EdUp? Well, if you didn't know, now you know. So go to edupexperience.com, that's EDUP experience.com, and become a subscriber today. First, you got to sign up to our free email newsletter, and then you'll find out how to become a subscriber. Again, go to edupexperience.com.
Yeah, I think when you were saying, I think a lot of challenges is a lot of people have asked students to communicate that to employers, but I don't think that's fair, because how are they supposed to know much about what the job? They're actually the people with the least experience about what the job is. So how can you expect them to to kind of plug that gap about what they know for a job that they don't understand. So that's not their fault. And so I think a lot of the guidance has to be done by both the employers and institution, which is why we've focused on having the credential that comes with every time they pass a homework assignment, they get some form of gamified credential. So at least they know the skills that they have that the employers like. So at least they can just read off of that sheet to convey to an employer what they can do. And then part of what we've had the students, the assignments that we've asked the employers to populate within the LMS for the students are projects that are relevant to that employer. So if it's for Snapchat, it's building a lens. And that way, they in an interview there for any sort of AR company or something, they can talk about how they built a Snapchat lens. And that itself is a talking point to an employer that they would never have known to do if the employer didn't make that as an assignment. I didn't know what that was until maybe 2 years ago. And so I think employers providing the guidance and providing the projects and contextualizing them within the courses, it's what helps the students convey it. So it should be the employers leading the students rather than the other way around.
Dr. Willis, looks like you're charging up for something here.
Yeah, like that's really cool because do you find that the institutions that you're working with, when we look at the data on students who, when you talk about the in and out students, but also those who graduate, 75 to 80% of community college students, when they graduate from that institution, they will stay in that region, in that area. So are you creating or helping to create the connections between the colleges and the employers? Because there are very few of these students that are going to go out to, I don't know, if they're in Maryland, they're going to go all the way to Arizona to say they're getting a job. They're going to be within the DMV region, right? So instead of it just being, and which is great, the articulation of the certification, are we creating those connections between the college and the employer so that when the employer sees it, it's not just, oh, this certification that we didn't know about, they're anticipating, they're excited about, they know that this is coming because we're working with Nexus, we're working with you all, we're working with the college, and we know that they're going to produce some really good stuff for these students.
Yes, and we try to make sure that the employers are as local as possible.
Okay.
To companies. And then credibility is not just the name of the brand, it's also a brand that you recognize. So if you drive by this company that is in this giant building every day, it'll have just as much credibility as, say, I don't know, something like Google, for example. You're like, hey, it looks like they employ lots of people. There's this large thing here. People are always coming in and out. That itself is credibility. So it's not always just the name. So I'm with you 100%, as we always try to find as many local employers as possible. Mm-hmm. And I mean, California is kind of odd in itself that it's so big with such different economic drivers, depending on where you're at, that you almost have to treat them like very different, like different states. And so what I think is really important too, is that the concept of currency, I know that is like almost an overused topic in our crypto age, but I think started my career on Wall Street. So you like to think about what is currency. It's where both sides essentially accept it as a form of value. Like, I'm going to go to In-N-Out and get a burger because they respect that this piece of paper means something. So it's getting both sides to respect a piece of paper. And that's how currency works. I think that's the same way you treat currency between an education institution and employer. How do you get both localized parties to recognize a piece of paper as value? So getting the local buy-in of that local employer is like super critical to that entire process. So I think hyper-localized employer buy-in is the ideal state for everything.
I still think about
money
when I think currency, right? I mean, money. That's, you talk to a student and you say you're going to graduate and you're going to go out. And if you talk about any currency beyond money, they don't understand, right? Because they want to earn. They want to earn not only for themselves, but their family. And the problem that community college solve in the U.S. that they're best at solving is creating generational wealth for students, getting in lower income students, students of color, students that have been underserved, get them through an education that, by the way, in other types of schools, that student may not be as successful, and community colleges are built in a different way. Getting them out, getting them a job, and that person earning for themselves and maybe leaving some kind of legacy. I mean, that's the difference of today's community colleges. That said, do you think that that you read the news. The college degree doesn't have enough it doesn't have value anymore. You don't need it. You can do these things without it. It's too much. It's too long. I mean, it's too right. Like there's always something behind it. You think we're doing a disservice to people by not fighting back a little bit more, Eddie, on the value of a college degree? Or do you think a college degree has become antiquated and then it needs more employer-based skills built within it to have its value? That was like 8 questions in a row, but take one.
No, it's okay. I got you. I see these come up a lot too. So one is, I'm going to break this down to one is, what is the value of a college degree and do we still need it going forward over the long term? I think despite the number of employers that have recognizable brands that say that we don't require college degrees anymore in their hiring process, there's still an inherent bias towards people with a college degree. And I think a lot of us could see why. And I think that bias is going to remain for an indefinitely long period of time, if not forever. So then the question becomes, well, how do we, but then at the same time, you can see why students don't feel like college degrees in general are providing the same value that they used to. And that's because they don't get them the jobs that they used to. And I think you've seen the stats on how, they can't pay back their loans, they can't get a job, like that kind of stuff. So I think the question becomes not necessarily ignoring the college degree, but how do we revamp the college degree to give students more value? And for most students, that value is a job. So it's just making the college degree a better facilitator of a job, whether it come from both training and relationships with the employer. But I think the greater point there is, how do we make the college degree deliver greater job value to the students? I think that's what needs to change.
You know what someone said to me? I was interviewing a college president. I cannot remember who it was, but that comment stuck with me because I've always brought up, like, Daria, what does this conversation look like for somebody that says a college degree doesn't have value? Is it like some adult mom or dad going to their kid going, you know what, you should not go to college? Like, that doesn't feel to me that it's happening. And this president goes, until the upper class white community stops sending their kids to college, there's always going to be value in a college degree. And I went,
co-sign that 100%.
Right. I mean, isn't that right? That's the trigger. And that because this way the society has been structured, not the college degree, how our caste structure is predicated on the past. Right. And you just go, yeah, that makes kind of a lot of sense. So really, what can we do to improve the value of a college degree for everyone?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
right?
I agree with that. This whole conversation about the college degree, not because we're talking about it, but in the last year or so, maybe 2, has really irritated me, because the people that are saying it, they all have college degrees from institutions that are really expensive and all that. So it helped you, but it's not going to help everybody else. Or is it that we have too many non-white people that are getting college degrees? And so now we've got to figure out how to stop doing that. So I always tell my students, because I've heard some of them say, well, we hear this conversation, and I always say, well, who is saying that? And analyze that, and how did it help them get theirs? Now, what I will say is that I do believe that the construction of our degrees needs to be under review. I don't believe that we just need to teach people one way or the other. I believe that students need to be able to select for their own and to be able to think on their own. I think that's another issue that we're seeing in the country today, is that we're using social media and everything else to make our decisions for us. When a college degree needs to be structured to where at least I can add, subtract, multiply, and divide and make some common sense decisions, either when I go to the grocery store or when I go to the polls. Because I've heard people say on one end, we just need to teach people how to do the skill and go out there and do that. Well, then when that happens, then you have folks who are saying, take money away from education and higher ed and K-12 schools. And then what do you get? You lose the culture of a people when you do that. So I do believe we still need to be focused on degrees that are well-rounded, but does it really take all of these hours and such to get there? Does it take 3 credit hours a semester to learn U.S. history? Do I need 15 chapters to get me to point A to B? I mean, I'm pushing back on the structure of how we teach. And just the way in which we've built it, it seems to be more about sometimes the employees than the students.
I'd like to add to, I 100% agree with that too. And I think you saw this years ago when there was a popularity of those software boot camps where it's like, hey, learn how to do this high paying job within 15 weeks. But those are all very expensive. But I think the reason why that became very popular for a time was because it condensed everything into what employers needed in a very short period of time. And that's why I feel like that was the market's reaction to thinking that the structure of the education system need to be changed, was that popularity of boot camps for a time. So I totally agree that it's the structure that's so important that needs to change as well.
Eddie, how do you go out there and look at this skill from this vendor, this employer, this thing is something that I want to broker to put in college in the curriculum somewhere? How do you make that decision?
That's the great question. We don't make that decision. We ask them. We said, what are you looking for? Because they know best what they're looking for. They said we want more people to learn more about like building those Snapchat lenses, for an example. I was like, what is that? See, that's a perfect example of, you say, let them tell you, because I would never have guessed that. I don't even really know what those are. And then when they tell you what they are and why, I think it's your job as the facilitator to say, okay, this is how we can do this for you, and necessarily try to tell too many people what to do. We use our expertise to know how do we make this possible. And so that's kind of how I see it, rather than telling students or faculty what to do. We ask the questions, and our expertise is how do we make it possible to train people at scale, because that's the thing the employers need help with, is like training and distributing their knowledge at scale. And I think that's the thing that we focus on how to do really well. So again, for us, it's just asking questions, not telling people what they should and should not learn.
No, I think that's probably why you focus on faculty so much, because you let them answer the question. So you've pretty much nailed that piece for any institution, because they certainly don't want to be told what to do. But when you let it, ruminate from the bottom up, you have much more success. So it makes perfect sense.
Who comes to you, Eddie? Is it the faculty that comes to you as an administrator? Because I think about relevance.
Yeah.
A lot of curriculum in higher education is dusty, for lack of a better way to say it. And, you have a program, and to put it in business terms, you may have a program as a faculty member that just doesn't sell. It's just not selling. And no matter what kind of money you put behind it, none of the students want to take it. Is that where the point at which you're contacted, or are you contacted more when something's scaling? You know what I mean?
I think in education, it's there's the status quo, I think is overly rewarded. People will always be enrolling in, and I taught a marketing class, right? They will always be taking this particular marketing class because for whatever reason, I don't know, the same reason people have always taken particular classes for a long time. So there isn't a lot of incentive to change it. So to be able to change it, I think it's less of an inbound from us, more of an outbound. But I think you're touching on a point of how do you make this scale? Because let's say you've got 20,000 students on this campus, a corresponding amount of faculty, and look at the number of resources that anybody has to do this at scale. You just can't run around to faculty. That's why I think that's why I go back to the LMS so much too, is that by putting an app like sitting there for us in Canvas, people are going to click on it and wonder what it is. It's like having an app on your phone. You might kind of click on it just to know what's going on. That's one way to do it. But then if you have a few other meetings with, say, faculty, their peers, department chairs, whatever, and then they enjoy using the product, they'll refer the other product. I think what's interesting within the education technology landscape is that people aren't focused as much on delivering a great value product. So they focus so much on having to do all this promotion. But I think as long as you build a product optimized for something they would actually want their colleagues to use, a lot of that, and make it convenient to access, like directly in the LMS, I think a lot of it takes care of itself.
What do you think, Daria? What do you think about that in terms of degree relevance and those types of areas for faculty?
Well, I always have an opinion that is controversial at times, but I think what I have found, and again, challenging the status quo, I'm glad you mentioned that, but a lot of the courses that are offered that we say that students have to take typically align with someone who says you have to take that. And I always ask the question, well, why? If I can think of how many of my courses coming through my bachelor's, master's, and PhD are actually 100% one-to-one relevant to what I'm doing today and how I got to this position. So I think, again, we started to challenge the status quo during the pandemic. If there was anything that was exciting about the pandemic, I would say it was that institutions began to be flexible, started thinking about other ways in which to deliver these courses, and even saying, well, why do we do things that way? But what I'm afraid of is now that we're supposedly in this post-pandemic world, that we're going back to status quo, the way it once was, traditional, and not asking the questions as to why we all have to do it this way. I think that what you're saying of having the app there, humans are naturally curious beings. So yes, they're going to click on that. They're going to dive deeper into it. But I'm looking for those courageous souls that are going to say, maybe we should challenge this and do it a different way. Maybe this course should be structured differently, or do we even need to offer the course anymore? These other ones make more sense for a more modern approach to the way this world is shaping to be.
What do you think, Eddie?
Oh, yeah, I'm 100% with that. I really also, the pandemic was so interesting. It forced us in a way that people had to rethink education, perhaps for the first time ever. And I'm with you. Create that disruptive change takes those courageous souls. And I like that a lot because that's what it takes for everything, especially within education. And what's interesting is that, to even get the app, when we deploy to different colleges, to even get the app installed in the LMS in the first place, takes at least one courageous soul, because they have to make the actual physical request to the IT department to say, install this thing. And then everyone's gonna be like, what is this thing? And then why? And then they have to be the courageous soul to say, this is why, and this is why I'm standing by it. So that takes that first courageous soul. And then after that, it makes it a lot easier for everybody else. But it still takes that some form of disruptive change. But we try to mitigate that because we try to minimize the amount of courage necessary for each soul where they have to make that change, but that will never change. So we always try to find as many of those folks as possible.
So do you have like a community of faculty from each institution? Because what I find is if I go in and say, do this thing, folks would be like, we're not doing it because you said do it.
I got a bad feeling about this.
But if another faculty member from another institution or something comes in and talks about how great whatever it is, and they hated it when it first came around, but this is what we're doing, it makes it a lot easier because you're not being a prophet in your own kingdom. So are you all building like that sort of a network from institution to institution so that when you have that one courageous person at the new place, you can say, well, let me help you out. You can talk to this person and we can kind of facilitate that dialogue that you'll have in your department or whatever on campus.
That's a great idea. I think we should.
There you go.
Maybe this podcast is
one thing already came out of this episode already.
I think that I guess.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I go to a lot of national conferences for community college trustees and things like that, but I don't think we have a community. We definitely don't have a community refer stuff to each other across states, not even within the state, now that I think about it. So yeah, let me think about that some more. That's a great idea. This goes on the whiteboard, which is right here. And then I guess I'll scribble about how to make that possible. But, that's an excellent point. The whole sort of organic referral thing is probably one of the most powerful in sort of net promoter score type stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to think about that this weekend.
You know what's just to kind of double down on what you're saying, Derry, I think it's important for anybody who's listening, because I know we have a lot of change makers on, particularly at the highest level. It's hard to create change because you can't be a prophet in your own land, but you need to be at the same time. And higher ed's built even down to the faculty, and I'm not saying all faculty or even most faculty, I'm saying some who look so internally because there's some level of control over something. And if you lose that control, you go, well, I have a job, or well, I have a place and I've been here for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you have faculty administration that have a certain number of programs which create a certain percentage of resource. And if I lose a program or that faculty member, I lose a position, I lose a program, and now I lose a percentage of my resource. So I'm not investing in the college that I might have an interest in. And then I've got a dean, and I might have 3 other deans, all with that percentage of resource. And so we have these layers, and then you have a bunch of committees built around those to assimilate you so that you can't innovate in certain instances. So it becomes very hard to do so. And what I like about your model, though, Eddie, is that it can be almost a curiosity piece, right? That you click on something, you see it, it's an app built within there, you go, what's this? And it becomes something that you don't have to generate through that loop.
Endless change of bureaucracy. And
yes.
paperwork.
To get people to go, oh, wow. Because curiosity ultimately is what creates change, right? It's the curiosity to go, can we do this differently? Instead of somebody bringing something to you, making you feel like you have to change, because you're going to fight it from the very beginning.
Right. And that actually reminds me of 2 things I did want to address significantly is, one, a lot of times in California, people are saying, well, it's hard to create that systemic change because of academic freedom, which is something from the governor's office that protects us as faculty from being what to teach within class. So then even within academic senates and things like that, it makes it very hard to create that change to adapt to new employer requirements. But so a lot of people are like, well, what are we can do about that? We actually use it to your advantage. You're saying, look, if you get the faculty buy-in to want to teach these things that our new employers are looking for, you can without having to go through that bureaucracy that we just talked about. So I actually think you kind of flip the narrative a little bit. And one thing you just reminded me of that I did want to address is this is a much bigger systemic change than necessarily we talk about little bits and pieces of how to create that change. But ultimately what is happening, what we're seeing now is that we're flipping that script. A lot of times they say, okay, you go to California Community College, you try to transfer to maybe like a UC or something like that too. But last year, we had one of the students from one of our California community colleges write his chancellor and say, I was accepted to this University of California school. I'm going to leave off the specific institution. And he was days away from attending and moving all stuff. But then he withdrew from that school to attend the community college in his community because they offered that program with Citigroup that we put together. And to me, that was quite telling is he told his chancellor that he withdrew from what is the traditional end goal that's been prescribed for all these years because of a workforce program that we put together. Actually, so I think that's where a lot of this future is headed is they don't care necessarily, like a huge chunk of students, they don't care necessarily what this institution anymore is. It's what kind of value does it deliver. So I think as long as you continue to evolve to deliver value, even if you lose a particular faculty or program or something like that, in the long-term game of things, I think everyone's going to be all right as long as you continue to deliver a lot of value to the students.
Well, there you have it, everybody. Dr. Willis, any other questions for Eddie before we close him out and give him the final?
No, I think this is amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing to help our students meet them. We're really meeting them where they dream.
Love that. Eddie, what do you see for the future of higher education?
Yeah, for the future of higher education, we've talked a lot about this point, but these times that we're in within the country, it makes me think of the higher education being the driver of economic equality. And so I think the future of higher education, we talked a little bit about how to make those changes to make it more valuable, but I'd like to think of an even bigger perspective is that I feel like it is the one thing that needs to be done right so that we change the way the country interacts with each other. And I think that'll fix a lot of things too, is the systemic social inequality that the gap has grown bigger than ever. I think that is the only thing that can really fix that, I think, at scale is higher education. So I think we really need to focus on that more than ever from both a capital standpoint and as a process standpoint. Otherwise, I think we're still going to have these sorts of issues well into multiple generations, which is unfortunate because I'd like to keep making progress as we go forward. And everyone needs to be happier, equal, and more prosperous. I think the country will be a little bit differently and we'll treat each other a little bit differently. So I see that as a bigger social issue.
Well, that's why we do this podcast and give a voice to people that are driving change within higher ed to level the playing field. That's why We put together great guest and co-host combinations like the one that you heard today. But before I let my guest co-host go, I got to call her out a little bit because she moved coast to coast between different community colleges, and we haven't gotten her back as a guest in her new gig, but we shouldn't have to respond, but we want to try to get her back as a guest to tell us more about Howard Community College. What do you think, Terry? We can get that on the calendar?
Yeah.
You're live?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. You know how much respect we have for you at EdUp, and love the work that you're doing. I told Elvin, of course, co-founder, one time, I said, one of these days we're going to be voting for Dr. Willis because she's going to be like at the Department of Ed or something. So watch out, industry.
Watch out. No, it would be an honor to come back. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
She's Dr. Daria Willis. She is the president of Howard Community College and an amazing change leader in the industry. Honored to have you. And of course, our guest today, really, really, really want you to check out his product and what he has going on. Eddie, what's the website where people can check out NexusEdge?
Yeah, the website is NexusEdge.com, but it's really hard to see all the stuff that we just talked about here unless you actually just reach out to one of us. It's hard to get the best you could do from that site to understand what we just talked about here is get a demo from the LMS that we've integrated into. So yeah, go to nexusedge.com, and maybe that's a way to get a meeting with someone on our team, and I think that would be great. But thank you so much, Joe, for having us today, and Dr. Willis, thank you so much for making time for us today. I really appreciate it. I know how hard it is to get time with college presidents on the calendar, so I appreciate you making the time and sharing your thoughts and innovating with everyone. So thank you so much for being on here, and appreciate it.
Super cool opportunity. Anytime.
There you have it, everybody. He's Eddie Lin, co-founder of NexusEdge Education and trailblazing EdTech leader. You've just EdUp'd. Higher education is evolving. And if you're in marketing and enrollment management, then you need to be at the Insights EDU conference.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
Insights EDU 2025 is happening February 12 through 14 in New Orleans, Louisiana. This is your chance to explore the latest trends in higher education and discover new and innovative strategies to level up your program marketing and enrollment. Hear from some of the best speakers in the industry, from companies like Google, LinkedIn, Adobe, and more. Registration is now open, so secure your spot while early bird pricing is still available.
Hey, everybody. This is Elvin Freitas, co-founder of the EdUp Experience. Did you enjoy that conversation? I hope you did. Did you know that you can actually hear this conversation early on and ad-free? And you can also hear extended episodes, bonus episodes, original content. That's right, original content and invites to special events, all while helping to sustain EdUp. Did you know that? Well, if you didn't know, now you know. To become a subscriber, go to edupexperience.com. That's EDUP experience.com to subscribe to our free email newsletter to learn how you can get access. Again, that's edupexperience.com. That's EDUP experience.com.